In a significant legal confrontation, California sued President Donald Trump over his decision to deploy federal troops and the California National Guard to Los Angeles amid protests. This lawsuit highlights a fundamental conflict between federal and state authority, specifically over who controls the National Guard. California's leaders, including Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta, argued that Trump's actions were illegal, labeling them an unauthorized takeover of state military forces. This case raises critical questions about the balance of power in the United States, with implications for states' rights and federal authority. The conflict began with federal immigration raids in Los Angeles, targeting workplaces and residences. These raids provoked widespread anger, leading to large-scale protests outside a detention facility. The protests quickly escalated, becoming chaotic with fires, burning cars, and clashes between demonstrators and police, who used tear gas to manage the crowds. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, a Democrat, expressed dismay, noting that the raids were unnecessary and had destabilized the community. On Saturday, President Trump announced he would federalize 2,000 California National Guard troops to restore order in Los Angeles, citing a potential rebellion. By Sunday night, National Guard soldiers and Marine Corps helicopters arrived in the city, intensifying tensions. Trump justified his actions by claiming the protests were too dangerous and that California's leadership had failed to control the situation, asserting that Los Angeles would have been destroyed without federal intervention. On Saturday, President Trump announced he would federalize 2,000 California National Guard troops to restore order in Los Angeles, citing a potential rebellion. By Sunday night, National Guard soldiers and Marine Corps helicopters arrived in the city, intensifying tensions. Trump justified his actions by claiming the protests were too dangerous and that California's leadership had failed to control the situation, asserting that Los Angeles would have been destroyed without federal intervention. Lack of state consent. Under normal circumstances, the National Guard operates under state control, Title 32 status, and federalization, Title 10 status, requires the governor's approval. California claimed Trump bypassed this requirement. Misuse of laws. The state argued that Trump's invocation of the Insurrection Act, which allows the president to deploy troops domestically in extreme cases like rebellion, was unjustified. California maintained that the protests did not meet the legal threshold for an insurrection. Overreach of power. The lawsuit accused Trump of exceeding his authority, violating states' rights, and undermining the U.S. Constitution. California requested a federal court injunction to halt the deployment and remove the troops, asserting that the president's actions were an unlawful seizure of state resources. On the 9th of June, Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta held a press conference to outline their case. Bonta argued that the federal intervention was unnecessary and exacerbated street violence, accusing Trump of creating chaos for political gain. Newsom called the situation a manufactured crisis, labeling Trump's actions a step toward authoritarianism that threatened democratic principles. Mayor Bass echoed these sentiments, emphasizing that Los Angeles had been largely peaceful before the raids and that federal actions had caused the unrest. President Trump defended his decision, asserting that deploying troops was essential to restore law and order in Los Angeles. He blamed California's leadership, particularly Governor Newsom, for failing to manage the protests, which he described as dangerously out of control. Via social media, Trump warned that violent protesters would face severe consequences and even suggested Newsom's arrest for opposing the deployment. The White House and Pentagon, led by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, supported Trump's legal authority, citing the Insurrection Act as justification. They argued that the protests constituted a rebellion or posed a significant threat, necessitating federal intervention to protect public safety and uphold federal laws. The dispute centers on several legal principles and statutes. Title 10 and Title 32 of the U.S. Code. Title 32 governs state control of the National Guard, with the governor as commander. Title 10 allows federal control, but typically requires gubernatorial consent. California argued that Trump's federalization of the Guard violated this protocol. Insurrection Act of 1807 This law permits the president to deploy federal troops or federalized National Guard units domestically in cases of rebellion or when state authorities cannot enforce federal laws. California contended that the Los Angeles protests did not meet these criteria. Posse Comitatus Act. This law restricts the use of federal military forces for domestic law enforcement, except in specific circumstances like those outlined in the Insurrection Act. California's lawsuit questioned whether Trump's actions adhered to these limits. States' rights and separation of powers. The case touches on broader constitutional issues, including the balance of power between states and the federal government and the roles of the president, Congress, and courts in military deployment decisions. The conflict deepened existing political divides. Supporters of Trump, many Republicans backed the president, arguing that his intervention was necessary to ensure safety and that California had mismanaged the protests. They viewed the deployment as a defense of national security. Supporters of California Democrats largely supported California, accusing Trump of abusing power and undermining states' rights. They saw the lawsuit as a stand for constitutional principles and civil liberties. Civil rights groups and legal experts organizations advocating for civil rights warned that deploying federal troops could erode public trust in the government and military. Many legal scholars supported California's position, questioning the legality of Trump's actions, though some acknowledged the president's authority under the Insurrection Act. The public was polarized, with some fearing the presence of soldiers in cities as a threat to freedom, while others saw it as a necessary response to unrest. Historical comparisons to past National Guard deployments during protests fueled debates about the appropriateness of Trump's actions. Both sides accused the other of political motivations. California claimed Trump was inflaming the crisis for electoral gain, while Trump's allies argued that California's resistance was a partisan effort to obstruct his administration. The court's decision will have far-reaching consequences. If California wins, a ruling in California's favor could limit the president's ability to deploy troops domestically without state consent, reinforcing states' authority over their National Guard and setting a precedent for greater state autonomy. If Trump wins, a victory for Trump could expand presidential power, allowing future administrations to federalize the National Guard or deploy troops with fewer restrictions, potentially reshaping federal-state dynamics. This case transcends the immediate conflict, touching on core issues of democracy, civil liberties, and governance. Democracy and civil liberties. The use of military forces against civilians raises concerns about free speech and assembly rights, with potential long-term effects on public trust. Federal-state relations. The lawsuit underscores tensions over immigration and other policies, complicating cooperation between states and the federal government. Legal precedent. The outcome will clarify the scope of the Insurrection Act and other laws, influencing how military power is wielded domestically. The legal battle is ongoing, with California's Governor Newsom and Attorney General Bonta facing off against President Trump and Defense Secretary Hegseth. The federal court will review arguments from both sides, and the losing party may appeal, potentially escalating the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. This process could take months or years, but its resolution will shape the balance of power in the U.S. for years to come. Who has the ultimate authority to control the National Guard in domestic crises, the state or the federal government?